Hey everyone, hope you're all in a good mood today because I've got a new story for you. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe, it really means a lot to me. So I need to figure out how to even start telling this without sounding insane, but here goes. The woman my boyfriend seated at my family's table during our engagement party. The one who stood up in the middle of my toast to announce she was carrying his baby. I had personally sent her an invitation, spelled her name right and everything. Because Raiden told me she was his coworker going through an ugly divorce, and it would mean a lot if she felt included. And I, genius that I am, said of course, the more the merrier, sit her wherever. He sat her at the family table, between his mother and my Aunt Brenda. And I found out later that wasn't random either, so if you're already mad, buckle up. Because the seating chart is the least of it. Let me back up or none of this makes sense. Raiden and I were together just under 3 years. Met through my cousin Quinn, who worked in his building. First stretch was good, he's charming in that way where waiters remember him and your friends text you after saying he's a keeper. He moved into my place about 18 months in. My name on the lease, my deposit, remember that, it matters, and we split things roughly down the middle. Or so I believed. He's great at the big romantic gesture and mysteriously vapor whenever the water bills due, and I used to tell myself that's just how some men are wired. I did a lot of that's just how he is. I know. You don't have to say it. I've said it to myself enough. The party wasn't even meant to be huge. We got engaged over the winter, quiet, and my mom wanted a proper celebration with both families before life got busy. We booked the back room at a restaurant my parents love, set menu, about 40 people. And this matters, it was both families in one room, which basically never happens, because his parents live a few states out and don't travel. So most of my relatives were meeting his for the first time. Raiden ran his side of the guest list. I ran mine and every single logistic. Somewhere in there, he brings up Emily, the coworker. How she's had a brutal year, no people in town. Could she come? And the part that makes me want to peel my own skin off, I felt good saying yes. I thought it was sweet that he cared about a lonely friend. I asked if she had dietary stuff so I could tell the restaurant. She's vegetarian. I made sure there was a vegetarian plate. For the woman pregnant with my fiancé's baby. I accommodated her. I want that carved on something. The seating. I'd made a chart, because I'm that person, and I had Emily at a friend table toward the back. I got to the restaurant early to drop the name cards, and Raiden had already been there. He'd gone ahead to check on the room, and half my chart was rearranged. Emily's card was up front at the family table. I said something, like, hey, that's not where I put her. And he gave me this whole thing about how she wouldn't know anyone in back, and would feel like a charity case, but his mom is warm and would look after her. Considerate, right? He's real good at making the wrong thing sound considerate. I've since learned that's his entire personality. So I dropped it. You don't die on a seating chart hill when your mother's texting you about whether the cake showed up. His mom, Laura, I'd met maybe twice. Both times pleasant and cool. She flew in the day before. And in hindsight, she was strange with me the whole party. Not rude, just watching me. And she kept touching Emily's arm, leaning into her. And I thought, oh, how nice. Laura likes Raiden's friend. I keep narrating how normal it all looked, and I know it makes me sound like an idiot, but you have to understand nothing felt wrong until it detonated. That's what still gets me. Toasts started as plates were being cleared. My dad went first, short, a little choked up. Raiden's best friend Steven did a funny one. Then me, because I wanted to say something about both families coming together. I'd practiced it in the car. I got maybe 4 sentences in, I'd just said the part about never expecting to feel this at home with someone's family, when Emily stood up. And I actually paused and smiled at her, because I thought she wanted to add a toast. People do that. And she looked dead at me and said she couldn't sit there and let me say those things when everyone at the table already knew. That was the phrase. Everyone here already knows. Then she said she was pregnant. 11 weeks. Raiden's. And that she wasn't going to keep playing the coworker in the back while I made speeches. And that Raiden needed to stop being a coward and finally do the right thing and be with her and their child. 40 people inhaled at the same time and then, nothing. My mom half stood. Brenda, right next to Emily, slapped a hand over her mouth. And I'm holding a glass with 4 sentences still stuck in my head, staring at Raiden, waiting for him to laugh, to say she's confused, to say anything that turns this into a nightmare with an exit. He didn't. I need you to hear that. He didn't leap up denying it. Didn't look shocked. He looked caught. He put his hand over his face, and then he looked at his mother. Not me, her. And Laura gave him this tiny nod. A go ahead. And that little nod is what actually took the floor out, more than the pregnancy, because it meant she knew. His mother flew in and sat at my family's table and ate my food and watched me rehearse a speech about loving her son. And she knew. And that's the moment I stopped being polite. Because I heard myself say it out loud across the whole room before I'd even decided to. I looked at that nod and I said, "So this is a setup. You two set this up. You sat her here on purpose." And Raiden started with the hands, the easy now voice, telling me not here, not like this, we'll talk at home. Like the problem in the room was my volume and not the pregnant woman he'd been hiding for a year. And I lost it. "I'm not going to pretty it up for you." I said, "Are you seriously standing in a room in front of my entire family shushing me?" I told him he didn't get to cheat for a year, plant his pregnant girlfriend at my dad's elbow, and then play the calm one because I'm reacting like a normal human being to my life exploding over the appetizers. I called him a coward to his face. Right there. And it felt like the truest thing I'd said in 3 years. I pulled my arm out of his hand so hard I knocked a wine glass over. And then it got loud. Because my family is not a discuss this calmly family. Quinn, who introduced us, who I think felt personally responsible, went off across the table asking Raiden how long? Say it out loud. My dad was up. And Raiden's father, who I'd barely spoken to all night, actually started defending Emily, saying she deserved to be heard. Which told me plenty about where Raiden learned it. And Emily was crying, saying she was sorry to do it like this, but she'd been asking Raiden for weeks to tell me. And he kept promising and stalling. And every time she thought about the baby, she couldn't stay quiet. And the horrible thing is, I believed that part. Because stalling and promising and making you feel unhinged for wanting a straight answer is the single most Raiden thing in existence. She wasn't describing a stranger to me. She was describing the man I lived with. So I turned on her too, because I wasn't in a generous mood about who was and wasn't a victim. I asked her how long, and she told me since basically the previous summer, and I did the math out loud, in front of everyone, because I wanted them all to hear it. That was when we were apartment hunting. That was the weekend I thought was his work thing. That was the trip where he cried in the car about his job and I held his hand the whole drive. I listed it, loud, and I looked at Raiden and asked which parts of my own memories I was allowed to keep, or whether he'd been faking all of them. And he gave me "I know how this looks," and I said, "No, you don't get "I know how this looks." You get to say I did this. So say it." He wouldn't. He just kept trying to herd me toward the hallway. And Laura came over and tried to take my hand and said something about how these things are complicated. That I seemed like a lovely girl, but Raiden and Emily had a history I didn't understand. A history. At my engagement party. To my face. And I pulled my hand back and told her the only history I cared about was the one where she sat down at my family's table knowing what was coming, and let me pour my heart out first. And that she could keep her complicated. I understood it fine. Her son's a liar and she flew in to help him land it softly. I want to be honest about my own head. Because I know how it looks from outside. Even standing in the wreckage, some ugly part of me still wanted him to fix it. 3 years doesn't evaporate because a woman stands up at a table. Part of my brain kept going, surely there's an explanation. Surely. And I hate that part and I've been sitting with it for days. But wanting him to fix it and letting him try are two different things. And I did not let him. I didn't leave with him. My mom drove me to my parents that night. And here's the detail that flipped the last switch in me. Raiden went to a hotel with his parents. Not after me. Not to fight for it. He left with the 2 people who helped stage the ambush, and Emily left separately, and I found out later the 3 of them were texting the whole time trying to spin who said what. Quinn's still in a work chat with him and saw enough of it. So here's where I actually am. Because this is supposed to be me asking for perspective, and not just screaming into the void. Though I've clearly done some of that too. The apartment is mine, lease and all, but his stuff is still in it, and I'm at my parents' and he's texting me paragraphs about how he never meant for it to come out this way and how we owe it to each other to talk in person. His mother messaged me too. Which is its own insane thing. My family is split between the ones who want his boxes on the curb tonight and the ones who are somehow already softening it into such a mess, poor everyone. Quinn wants to forward me everything from the work chat. And I haven't said one word back to Raiden. Because the second I do, he's going to try to manage me again. And I want to know exactly what I want before I let him get me on a phone. Right now, his stuff is still in my apartment, and he still has a key. Sometimes I don't understand how people wake up and decide to behave like this. My honest opinion is that Raiden was hoping Op would be too humiliated to fight back. Put her in front of 40 people, surround himself with his parents, let Emily force the breakup, then whisper not here. Not like this so Op looks hysterical, and he looks reasonable. I hate men who create chaos and then perform calmness inside it. Laura's "you don't understand their history" would have permanently ended any respect I had for her. Having history with someone doesn't magically make cheating acceptable. She helped her grown son turn Op's engagement party into a public handoff between girlfriends and still expected Op to take her hand politely. And I'm not fully excusing Amelie either. Raiden clearly lied and stalled, but standing up during Op's toast was deliberately cruel. The baby deserved honesty. Op didn't deserve to be used as the backdrop for her announcement. The hotel and coordinated texts confirm it for me. They weren't processing guilt. They were getting their version straight. I would communicate only in writing and never be alone with any of them. Update. Okay, first. I did not expect this many of you, and to everyone who told me to change my locks before I did another single thing, you were right. I did it. And it turned out to matter way more than I thought, so let me get into it. Where I left off, I hadn't answered Raiden. Still hadn't figured out what I wanted. And I'll be honest with you because you've earned it. I spent that first night at my parents' not sleeping, reading his paragraphs on a loop, and there was a stretch around 4 a.m. where I almost called him. Because the Raiden in those texts was so calm and so sad and so reasonable that my brain kept trying to file the whole party under insane misunderstanding we'll laugh about someday. That's the thing nobody warns you about. The person who blows up your life is also the person your body's trained to run to when your life blows up. I didn't call. Give me a trophy. What actually snapped me out of it was the locks. My dad drove me to the apartment the next morning. I wanted to be there in daylight, with a person, get a locksmith out before Raiden decided to swing by for a few things. And we walk in, and he's already inside. Standing in my kitchen. With Amelie's stuff on my counter. Her tote bag, a water bottle, her cardigan on the back of my chair. He brought her to my apartment. The one I pay for. While I was at my parents' crying into a couch cushion. And I went off. Immediately, none of the frozen in the doorway thing. I asked him what the actual hell she was doing in my home. And his explanation was that Amelie wasn't feeling well and it was closer than the hotel and he didn't think I'd be there. Like the crime was the scheduling. Like if he'd had my calendar, he'd have coordinated the affair logistics better. I told him get her out, now. And he did the thing, lowered everything. Started talking to me like I'm a toddler mid-tantrum. Be reasonable, we're all adults. Amelie's pregnant, she shouldn't be on her feet while we argue. Using her pregnancy as a shield in my kitchen. So I told him the only thing that wasn't reasonable in the room was him standing in an apartment with his name on nothing, lecturing the woman whose name is on all of it. My dad, who is normally the quietest man alive, told him he had 10 minutes to take his things and this woman and go. And Raiden had the nerve to look at Emmy like, can you believe your dad, appealing to me, trying to make me the buffer between him and consequences. Even then, even standing next to the girl he'd hidden for a year, his first instinct was to team up with me against everyone else in the room. That's genuinely how he sees me, as his handler, his translator, the person who smooths the world down for him. Amelie, to her credit or whatever, was humiliated to be caught there. Kept saying she didn't want to come, that Raiden told her it was fine, and she looked at him when she said it, and something crossed her face. Because she's starting to learn that Raiden told me it was fine is a sentence that's now ruined multiple lives. She grabbed her bag and went to wait in the car. Which left me, Raiden, and my dad. And Raiden clearly thought with her gone he could get me softer and work his magic. And this is where it stopped being just he cheated and got so much worse, so stay with me. I asked him flat out how long he'd been planning to have her announce it at the party. Because I'd had a full day to think, and there is no world where a woman spontaneously stands up mid-toast, unless she's been told it's her moment. He denied planning it, said she went rogue, said he was as blindsided as I was. And I said then explain the nod. Your mother's nod. 40 people saw it, I saw it, explain it. And he slipped. He said his mom only did that because she'd been telling him for weeks he had to end things with me and be honest, and the second it left his mouth he knew he'd handed me a live wire. So I yanked on it. Hard, and out it came. Laura's known since the fall. Since around when it started. Raiden had called her, all torn up, agonizing between us. And instead of telling her son to stop cheating on the woman he lived with, Laura's advice was basically to figure out which of us was the better long-term bet. And go from there. She never liked that the apartment was mine. For over a year, she'd been making comments to him about how it wasn't a good look that her son wasn't the provider. That he should be with someone he could take care of. Someone who needed him. And Amelie, fresh out of a divorce, financially shaky, emotionally wrecked, needed him in a way I apparently didn't. Because I had the nerve to have my own lease. In Laura's math, the woman he betrayed was the problem. Because she was too self-sufficient to steer. And Raiden told me this himself. Defending her. Thinking it made him look better. See, I was conflicted. I was getting counsel. not understanding he was describing a family that spent months workshopping which woman he should keep like I was a car they were deciding whether to buy out at the end of the lease. And I told him exactly that. I said, you sat around with your mommy running a cost benefit on 2 actual human women and you have the guts to call it being conflicted. I asked him if they used a whiteboard. I was not kind. I'm not going to pretend I was. And the seating snapped into place and made me sick. Emily next to Laura, next to my Aunt Brenda. Brenda is my mom's sister, the biggest talker in our family, kind but constitutionally incapable of holding information. And I think, Raiden wouldn't confirm it, got real slippery. The shape Laura nudged it into was for the news to sort of surface at the party in a way that looked like it happened to Raiden instead of something he did. Sit the pregnant friend next to the family megaphone and the supportive mom. Let the truth bubble up in a chaotic public setting. And Raiden gets to be the overwhelmed guy caught in an impossible situation instead of the man who lied for a year. Emily was supposed to be a slow leak. She turned into a burst pipe. Because she was more done with being hidden than they budgeted for. She didn't follow the script. She blew it up. And that is the part that killed whatever was left, if you're tracking my pathetic little emotional graph. Not the cheating. The staging. The idea that these people looked at my engagement party, the one I planned, deposited on, seating charted, ordered a vegetarian plate for his secret girlfriend for, and saw a venue. A convenient room. I told him that too. I said, you didn't just cheat on me, you cast me in a play. You gave me a toast to read so I'd look stupid holding a glass when the curtain went up. And I asked him whose idea the timing was, his or his mother's. And he wouldn't answer. Which is an answer. I told him to get out. He didn't. Kept going, pivoting now to the money argument. The we have a life together argument. We can't throw away 3 years. Emily being pregnant doesn't mean he wants to be with her. It was one thing that happened and he made a mistake. And his family blew it out of proportion. And notice the footwork. Because I sure did. An hour ago, the mother was giving wise counsel. Now she blew it out of proportion. He rearranges the whole story depending on who's in front of him. In front of Emily, she's the one he owes. In front of me, she's a mistake his mom overreacted to. He is 2 entirely different men depending on the room, and I got to watch him swap right in front of me. And I told him I could see him doing it. I said I can literally watch you deciding which version I'll buy, and it's not working. So stop. My dad ended it, told Raiden the locksmith was on the way and after today his key wouldn't work. Take what he could carry now, arrange the rest through me in writing. And Raiden looked at me, not my dad, always me, and said, really, you're doing the locks thing. Like I was being petty and dramatic. And I said yes, really, and I put my palm out for the key, right there. He wouldn't give it. Said he'd need it to get the rest of his stuff. Which is not how keys work when the lease has one name and it's mine. And my dad stepped in, and Raiden finally slapped it on the counter, grabbed 1 bag of clothes, and left. Left most of his stuff. On purpose, I'm certain now, because his things in my apartment are leverage. A reason to keep coming back. A foot in the door. Literally a foot in my door. Locksmith came an hour later. New locks. I stood in my own kitchen after, and it was the first full breath I'd taken in 2 days. Then the family front opened up, and I was not ready. Because Brenda, seated next to Emily, has been calling my mom nonstop, and it came out that Brenda actually talked to Emily during dinner, before the toast. And Emily had hinted at something. Said she and Raiden were closer than people knew. And Brenda, not getting it, said something warm and encouraging back. Brenda feels sick about it now. But here's the mess. Brenda also told half the extended family her version. Heavy on drama, light on accuracy, and now I've got relatives who think Raiden and Emily were some doomed love story I was too oblivious to notice. Which is its own special humiliation. Because the exact narrative Laura wanted, poor torn Raiden, victim of circumstance, is taking root in my family through my aunt. Laura built the party to launder his reputation, and Brenda's doing the laundry for free. So I called Brenda. Actual call, not a text. And it was hard. Because I love her, and she was crying and apologizing. But I needed her to get that repeating those 2 were clearly meant to be. So sad to the family is actively helping the person who humiliated me. And she didn't get it at first. Kept saying she was only telling people what she saw, and I had to walk her through it. That what she saw was a scene Laura arranged specifically so people like Brenda would see it and carry it. And I wasn't gentle about it either. I said, Brenda, I love you, but you are being used as a loudspeaker by the woman who set me up. So you can either keep repeating her script, or you can help me correct it. And that landed. Brenda went from devastated to furious on my behalf in about 4 minutes. Which, if you know Brenda, is a weapon I can now point. Meanwhile, Raiden will not stop texting. And the texts keep shifting. which tells me the calm, sad, reasonable approach isn't getting a bite, so he's cycling angles. First it's, we need to talk about the apartment and my things. Then it's, I know my mom made this worse and I'm sorry. Throwing Laura partway under the bus to seem accountable. Then last night, a long one about how Emily is pressuring him and he feels trapped, and he doesn't even know if he wants this baby situation, and he misses me and misses us and thinks we ended things too fast. He cheated for a year, got a woman pregnant, staged my party, and now that door number 2 is stressful, he's homesick for me. I'm not the relationship. I'm the fallback. The softer place to land when the plan he chose gets hard. And the infuriating part is the apartment really is a problem I have to solve. Because his stuff genuinely is here and he genuinely has a right to his own belongings. And I can't torch it on the lawn no matter how hard Quinn is volunteering to help me do precisely that. So I have to have one more controlled interaction to get his life out of mine. And Raiden knows it. He's counting on it. He thinks that handoff is his shot to get me alone. And soft, and talk his way back in, he's already floating that he comes sorted out one evening this week. Just us. So we can do this like adults. I'm not doing it just us. I'm not doing it on his terms. I've figured out that much. So here's where I am. Locks are mine, keys back, one bag of him gone, and the rest of his life sitting in my spare room. My family's split between the ones who want to bury him and the ones accidentally resurrecting him. Emily's learning Raiden said it was fine as a curse she caught. Laura's version is spreading. And Raiden wants a cozy solo evening to move his boxes and move back into my head at the same time. I've decided how that handoff is going to go, and it will not be the quiet private evening he's picturing. I'm sorry, but bringing Emily into Op's apartment the very next morning is actually insane. And then saying he didn't think she'd be there like that makes it better. He really thought the apartment was still his safe little base while Op stayed at her parents being devastated. The part about Laura honestly explained a lot. She didn't like that Op had her own lease and didn't need her son. So apparently, Emily was the better option because Raiden could feel important around her. That is such a weird and unhealthy way to look at relationships. And now that Emily and the baby are becoming real responsibilities, he suddenly misses Op and feels trapped. Of course he does. He doesn't miss the relationship. He misses having someone stable who handled everything for him. I'm glad Op changed the locks, because leaving most of his stuff there absolutely feels intentional. He wants a reason to come back and talk until she starts doubting herself again. I wouldn't do the handoff alone either. Pack everything beforehand, have Dad and Quinn there, give him one time slot, and don't turn it into another 4-hour Raiden meeting. Final update, okay? This is the last one, and it's the messiest, loudest, most unhinged day of my life. So pour something and sit down. Because a lot of you had opinions about the handoff, including the woman who told me to leave his boxes in the rain and text him a photo. I love you. But what I did was better than petty, and the ending is not what Raiden thought he was walking into. Quick recap of my brain. Raiden wanted a cozy solo evening to move his boxes. I knew the second I was alone with him he'd do the thing. Lower his voice. Get reasonable. Remind me of the good years. Make Emmy the crazy one for still being upset a week after the woman he impregnated stood up during my toast. He's not scary. He's worse. He's persuasive when you're exhausted. So I made the handoff a Saturday afternoon, daylight, with people. My dad, my cousin Quinn, and his own mother. Yeah, I called Laura and told her to come. Here's the logic. Raiden's whole power came from telling every person in his life a different story. To me, he was the guy his mom overreacted about. To his mother, the son torn between 2 women. To my family, thanks to Brenda, a tragic romantic figure. 4 rooms, 4 Raidens. And every version depended on those rooms never touching. So I put them in one room. That was the calculation. Everything after was pure chaos. And it was glorious. I told Raiden fine. Come Saturday at 2, we'll sort your things like adults. And he was thrilled. I could feel it through the phone. He thought he'd won. Then I called Laura. And that was its own fight. Because she opened with the "these things are complicated" dear routine, and I let her run a minute. And then told her, real calm, that I had questions about the seating chart. Who moved Emily to the family table? The nod. And I said if she wanted her side heard she should come Saturday. Because Brenda was already telling the whole family that Laura orchestrated a public ambush of her niece. And right now that was the only version circulating. Laura didn't know it was landing that way, and she has an image to protect, so she said she'd be there. Everybody in this story is managing their reputation except me, and I was about to burn all of it down with exactly that. Saturday, 2 o'clock. Dad and Quinn already there. Raiden walks in with a coffee for me. Reading a room has never been his gift, like this is a normal errand, And then he sees his mother on my couch and his whole face drops. He looks at me like I broke some sacred rule. And I just said we're all adults, right? Let's sort it out together. Threw his own line back down his throat. It felt incredible. Then I started asking questions. In front of everyone. In the exact order that made it impossible for him to give two people two different answers. Because everyone was right there. Started with the seating. Asked Raiden, in front of Laura, who moved Emily's card to the family table. He tried the she wouldn't know anyone line again. So I turned to Laura and asked her the same thing. And Laura braced to defend herself against Emmy, not against her own son's cross-examination. Said she'd suggested it. Because she thought it was cruel to hide Emily in the back given the situation. In front of my dad. So now my father knows Laura knew about the pregnancy before the party and helped seat the pregnant girlfriend at his daughter's family table on purpose. My dad didn't yell. He just looked at Raiden and asked, very quiet, if he'd known his mother knew. Raiden couldn't lie, because I'd already gotten the conflicted, getting counsel admission out of him last week and Quinn had heard about it. So he said yes. Out loud. Witnessed, he told his mother months ago. They discussed it. And they both sat at my party knowing. And that's when it stopped being a calm interrogation and turned into a screaming match, because Laura could not leave it there. She started defending it. Said it forced honesty. That Raiden never would have told me on his own, and she wasn't going to let her son marry me under false pretenses. My false pretenses. And I lost it. Fully, I stood up and said, you did not force honesty. You staged a humiliation. You sat at my table and let me talk about loving your son, so the fall would be as far as possible. And Laura fired back that I was being hysterical, proving her point, and I said, what point? That I'm too independent to control. Because that's the actual crime here, isn't it? I own my life and Emily owes you rent. We were both up, both yelling over the coffee table, and my dad had to put a hand between us. And here's the beautiful part. Raiden tried to shut his mother up. Started talking over her, telling her she was making it sound worse than it was. And Laura spun and went off on him, said she'd told him for a year to handle it and he was too weak to. So she handled it herself. Too weak. In front of Quinn. And I stepped back and let them, because this was the whole point. The calm, the different stories, the it's complicated. All of it only works one-on-one. Put mother and son in a room and make them reconcile their two versions and they can't. Because the versions were never built to touch. Raiden needed his mom to be the overreacting villain. Laura needed Raiden to be the coward who forced her hand. Both true. And each one blew up the other's story just by being screamed across my living room. My dad started to step in to break it up, and I put my hand on his arm and said no. Let them. And Quinn leaned in and asked Laura the thing I'd been building toward. So the plan was for it to come out at the party. Not really a question. And Laura, still hot, still swinging at her son, said the party was simply where everyone would be together, so it made sense. She admitted the venue was chosen. My engagement party, confirmed out loud as a delivery mechanism, like reasonable event planning, in front of my father and my cousin. Then I turned the whole thing on Raiden, because I'd earned one. I asked him the only thing I still wanted to know, whether any of it was real. The apartment hunting. The trip to my grandmother's. The night he cried about his job and I stayed up rubbing his back till 3 a.m. And he gave me this speech about how of course it was real. He loved me. The Emily thing was separate. Men compartmentalize. And I cut him off and said, don't you dare tell me men compartmentalize like that's biology and not a coward's word for lying to 2 women at once. I said you kept me as the backup while you and your mother decided which of us was the better deal. You let me plan a wedding as your insurance policy. And then you sat me at the head of a table so your family could watch me find out. And he opened his mouth 3 separate times and finished nothing. Because every version needed a different audience and they were all sitting there staring at him. Now the practical part. Because I know some of you want to know what I did. Not just what I yelled. His stuff. I'd packed all of it myself over the week. Carefully, no drama. Everything folded, itemized on a sheet taped to the top box. Because I wanted 0 grounds for him to claim I wrecked anything, or that he needed to come back for the rest. That come back for the rest was his entire strategy and I closed it. Every box taped, labeled, listed, and while Raiden was still reeling from the Laura of it all, my dad and Quinn just started carrying boxes out to his car. I handed him the itemized sheet and asked him to check it and sign that he'd received everything. And he did, refusing to sign in front of his mother and my dad. After everything that just came out, would have looked deranged. The second he signed, there was no open thread left. No stuff here. No key. No pending handoff. I engineered it so the last useful thing he'd ever do in my life was confirm in writing, that he had no reason to come back. And the apartment, my lease, the thing Laura hated that I had, I told him plainly, in front of all of them, that he was never getting a key again and this was the last time he'd stand inside it. Laura couldn't help herself. Said something about how sad it was that I cared more about a lease than a relationship. And I turned around and gave her the truest thing I've got. I said the reason your son wanted me is the exact reason you hated me. Because I couldn't be moved. Emily can be moved. She needs somewhere to go. I don't. I own my life. And that's precisely why he's leaving it in labeled boxes today while you watch. As for Emily, she and Raiden are a full disaster now. She found out he'd spent the week texting me about missing us and feeling trapped by the baby. Because Raiden physically cannot stop running his mouth to whoever's in front of him. And eventually the person in front of him was her. She asked him straight if he'd been trying to get me back, and he gave her the same fog he gave me, and she got done. They're still tangled because there's a baby, which is real and permanent, and I feel for that kid, but the fantasy Laura built, Raiden settled with the woman who needs him. Collapsed the same way everything else did. You cannot run 4 stories forever. They catch up when the rooms combine. The family fallout is honestly what I care about most. Which surprised me. Brenda went scorched earth once she understood she'd been used as Laura's megaphone. And she's now personally correcting every relative who thinks it was a tragic love story, with the full seating chart timeline at volume. Because Brenda talking is a natural disaster and she's finally aimed the right way. And Laura left my apartment that day having lost the one thing she came to protect, looking like the reasonable almost mother-in-law. Because my dad and Quinn heard her admit, in her own furious words, that she chose my party as the delivery mechanism. My family does not forget things like that. She came to manage a naive girl and confessed the whole staging in my living room, screaming at her own son the entire time. Raiden texted me that night. One more paragraph. Hoped I'd someday understand he never meant to hurt me. That his mom pushed him. That he was in a hard spot. Same fog, new day. I didn't write him a speech. I told him the boxes were signed for. We're done. Don't contact me again. And this time there's nothing of his left in my life to make him think there's a door. His stuff is out, the locks are mine, and the last time Raiden ever stood in my apartment, his own mother sat on my couch and screamed the whole thing out loud for me. Okay, I'm sorry. But inviting Laura was insane in the best possible way. Op basically put 2 liars in the same room and watched them accidentally tell the truth while trying to blame each other. And Laura calling her hysterical after admitting she used the engagement party to force the affair into the open. Girl, I would have started yelling too. We can all be hysterical today. Also, men compartmentalize shut up. You're not psychologically complex, Raiden. You just lie based on who's currently looking at you. I almost respect Laura more for screaming that he was too weak to handle it. Because at least one person in that family finally described him accurately. The itemized boxes and signature are killing me. After all his speeches about love. His final role in Op's life was basically signing a delivery receipt in front of his mother. Perfect. Horrible week. Excellent ending. Oh. Anyway, that's the story. Love you guys. See you in the next one.